put forward.
This meeting is being recorded.
Has that the River Ready team has done a lot of work to invite special guests and to invite a broad audience of people in Eugene in addition to our neighborhood. So we right now we have 70 participants signed in, so we're not going to go around and do introductions. But if you will register your name in the chat, and when we start doing questions and discussion, if you'll introduce yourself at that time when you get to speak. So Jackie, who is started up the emergency prep team and has been very good leader in making this happen, is going to take it over from here. Oh, first I want to find out if there is any announcements. We have a few minutes for announcements. If there's any urgent announcements, please raise your hand on the electronic hand raiser. Okay. Brenda, I see a flesh and blood hand. I don't see a icon. But go ahead. Brenda,
Well,
did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to say this neighborhood has been watching Oakley Meadow turn into Riversong co-housing, and we have certificate to occupy as of about 10 days ago, and so people are actually moving into your neighborhood. There are 28 new households moving into the neighborhood, and only about 3 or 4 of us are long-term. I'm a 3-year Eugene person. Some are longer Eugene, but only 3 or 4 of us are Eugene originals. So
thank you, Brenda. Welcome to the neighborhood. John, you're muted.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody that next Monday at 5:30, the city council is having a hearing on an ordinance that hopefully will control the Zippo laminator vibration issue for the neighborhood. I'll post something in the chat on how you can find out more and participate. But if you've been affected, please sign up and testify. Thank you.
And I actually saw the report on the local news tonight on TV. Any other announcements? Okie dokie. Just to say that we have a kind of a code of conduct in our neighborhood meetings, which is meant to promote civil discourse, and personal attacks and opinions in the chat or in person are not appreciated. Most of us are very lovely neighbors, so we just rely on that good faith. John, did you not put your hand down, or do you have another thing? Okay, so let's go on. Jackie, it's over to you.
Thanks, Claire. All right, everybody. And in case anybody did not see, you can see the closed captioning if you click on the show captions CC button at the bottom of your Zoom controls, in case you need to look at that tonight. So I am here with the emergency preparedness team tonight. We formed this committee back in 2020. It kind of got started, and we've been having monthly meetings ever since then. So it's been almost 2 years now, which is exciting. The committee was really formed and kind of created a couple of goals that we brought back to the River Road Community Organization, and those were to increase community engagement, to identify hazards, risks, and threats within our neighborhood, and then also to develop some response plans whenever we do figure out what those risks and threats are to our neighborhood. And one of the risks and threats that we've identified is the fact that we all live so close to the Willamette River here in the very low elevation part of town. So we have contacted the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and invited them to come and talk to us tonight about dam safety and flood inundation mapping. So we're going to be hearing from some of these experts tonight. We will definitely have time for questions and answers at the end of the meeting. So we are going to mute everybody during the presentation. But if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat or save them to the end. We'll have you raise your hand to be able to ask them. And then we'll also talk about some next steps at the end of the meeting. How can people get involved in whatever we learned tonight? Things like that. couple of reminders in the chat. Please sign in, especially if you're a River Road neighborhood, sending a direct chat to Charlesy. And then also, if you'd like more information about what we're doing in the realm of emergency preparedness, or you have specific questions, we will post that email in the chat as well. It's readynorthwesteugene@gmail.com. So with that, I'm going to introduce our presenters that we have here tonight. We have Dustin Bankston, Deputy Operations Project Manager of the Willamette Valley Project. We also have Matt Chase here tonight, who is the Dam Safety Program Manager of the Dam and Levee Safety Section. And then also Natalie Ehrlich, Geotechnical Engineer of the Dam and Levee Safety Section. And they're all here from the Portland District of the Army Corps. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters tonight. Let me go ahead and mute everybody. All right, so Matt and Dustin, over to you.
I should be sharing my screen. Please let me know if you see that.
Yes, I can see.
Okay. Dustin, take it away. Dustin, you may be on mute there.
There we go. I had to wait to be unmuted there. I think Jackie just took care of me. Can you hear me now? Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having us here tonight. Boy, I'll tell you, I breathed a sigh of relief. We did a lot of little run-ups to this to make sure the technology worked, and I was nervous right up till this morning. We had kind of a nationwide issue with some systems, and so it was a little uncertain even early this morning how this would go. But I'm really appreciative to be here tonight to tell you what I think is a very good news story. And I think at the end of tonight, you know, success from my perspective would look like folks being really well informed about the infrastructure that we operate and maintain, the benefits they provide, the risks that still exist despite what I consider to be a very robust risk management program. But also, you know, really well informed, right? You understand the context that we live in, and we have some really smart people here to help tell that story tonight. I am the Deputy Operations Program Manager, a Project Manager for the Willamette Valley Project. That's the 13 dams here in the Willamette Valley system. I've been here since 1993, so quite a while. I've seen a few extreme weather events, a few other issues that we've managed through over time. So hopefully be able to share some of those experiences as we go forward tonight. Matt, can you advance the slide? We'll just talk the agenda really quickly. Boy, done a lot of these presentations, and I really think it's important to provide context first before we look at some of the potential consequences of the dams. And we'll talk a lot about our operations and maintenance, how we inspect and monitor our dams. I, like you, live below one of those 9 dams in Lane County. I raised my kids below one of those 9 dams in Lane County. And I told Charlesy earlier, I don't go to sleep at night worried about their safety. But I am really well informed, right? I have a lot of insight into what we do from a dam safety program. And I think that's a very good news story for us, for the folks that live under and below some of these structures. We'll talk about just some basics and how we quantify risk, and then some of the more detailed ways in which we not only quantify the risk to our structures, but also manage interim risk until we can decide on what the best corrective path is. And then we'll go to the National Inventory of Dams tool and give you a look at a system that's all about transparency. It's all about helping folks understand the condition of the facilities, the structures, the potential consequences from really, really unlikely events, kind of low probability, but certainly very high consequence events. And with that information, you know, maybe next steps for you all come from that, and how you plan for some of those contingencies, whether they're maybe higher likelihood or really low likelihood events. Okay, Matt, you want to advance our slide? So first, just talk to you about the Willamette Valley Project. And I know a number of these structures are going to look very familiar to you, but 13 what I'll call multi-purpose facilities, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. Completed, started construction in the late 30s and completed construction of the Willamette Valley system as we look at it now in around 1969. Just before the pandemic, right, 2019, we were commemorating 50 years of the Willamette Valley project in operation, and we had a number of events planned to help kind of raise or re-raise awareness. We know a lot of people have moved into the Willamette Valley in the last 50 years of service, and it's not surprising at times to find folks that don't know that they live below dams. And then in 2019, obviously, we had the big disruption, but we also had a very large snow event and a fairly large flood event in the Willamette Valley that did a lot of the work for us in terms of reminding people what is the primary purpose and why were these dams constructed. All of these dams are a little bit different, right? Built over a span of years, a little bit different design, all have their own features that we monitor in different ways. But all of them providing tremendous benefits to folks that live in the Willamette Valley. Next slide, Matt. When I say multi-purpose project, flood risk management, which is our way of saying, you know, how do we protect from floods? But flood risk management is that prime driver. Since the dams were constructed, probably in excess of $25 billion of flood damages. And of course, on an annual basis, those numbers increase rapidly as there's more development in the valley and people are moving in. In that April storm event that I mentioned earlier, in a 7-day span, the operation of our dams to reduce flows on the downstream main stem of the Willamette prevented about $2 billion in flood damages, right? And that's just in a 7-day span. So the increasing importance of these dams as we continue to expand the population of the Willamette Valley is really evident. All of those other purposes, irrigation, water supply, recreation, fish and wildlife, all of those purposes are kind of in balance or in tension. It's how we operate the system and try to maximize the benefits or minimize the impacts of the dams in the Willamette Valley. And while there are tremendous benefits, there are certainly impacts associated with dam construction. Those authorized project purposes, so these are part of the original authorization or subsequent authorizations of the dams, include irrigation and water supply. So an increasing population in Willamette Valley will need both water for our homes and water for the things we grow and use and sell. We have significant impacts or can have impacts on water quality. Flows in the main stem of the Willamette River would be far less during the hotter and drier part of the summers were it not for augmentation flows that we can provide from that stored water in our facilities. 8 of our facilities produce hydropower. We actually have a 9th hydropower facility that's operated by a private utility at Dorena. And while those facilities don't produce the volume of hydropower, they're fairly small in relation to some of the main stem Columbia and Snake projects. They do provide significant benefits, especially in and around peaking power demand. So like this evening when we come home and it's cold and the thermostat goes from 65 during the day to 72 or 70 at night, and you turn on your lights and you turn on your stove, there's a peak power demand, and the generation from our facilities helps balance some of that peaking power demand. And some of what we use, or when we produce hydropower, we can have effects on water quality. We manage temperature through a mixture of spill and generation capacity at a couple of our facilities. Fish and Wildlife Program has been very visible. We are aggressively working and have been for some time on how to improve the operation of our facilities or modify our structures to increase recovery of federally listed species. So salmon and steelhead being really visible for most folks. We also have resident species like bull trout that we are working to try to improve so that we can provide as much benefit as possible, the continued operation of our structures. Then, of course, most folks understand the recreation value, tremendously important, the value of recreation in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But all of those are a function of how we use stored water during the summer conservation season. So as we fill these pools, as the flood risks go down in the spring, we start to use that water over the course of the summer and maximize these benefits. And then we bring those pools back down to provide our maximum storage capacity so that we can prevent flooding downstream through the peak of that flood season. And that process is repeated annually. And I mentioned earlier, we also have the Rogue Basin projects. We manage 2 projects in Southern Oregon, one Applegate all the way down by the California border, and the Rogue Lost Creek project is in the Rogue Basin as well. So lots and lots of facilities that we manage. We're the size of some small districts in the Corps of Engineers. We have about 160 or so people spread out to do operations and maintenance of those facilities. And what I didn't mention is, in addition to the dams themselves, you have hundreds of miles of revetments. So structures that were built to stabilize the banks of the Willamette River, as well as a number of hatcheries that were constructed over that same span of time that we operate and maintain as well. Next slide, Matt. So how do we do this, and how do we ensure the safety, your safety and my safety, living below these dams? And there are a lot of things in play that help us operate and maintain what I referred to earlier as a really robust dam safety program. In the lower right-hand side of that slide, you see the operations and maintenance slide, and that is our day-to-day, right? Those people that are out on the facilities, mowing with tractors, walking the facilities, operating and maintaining spillway gates. That's our boots on the ground day to day. And any number of times that routine maintenance has identified issues before they became critical. Back in 2005, if folks were around, you might remember that we identified an issue at Fern Ridge Dam. We had some failure of a drainage system in the dam, and we were losing material. That initially was identified by one of our maintenance employees on a tractor who had mowed that dam a number of times and went through a depression and said, well, that's not right. Somebody needs to come take a look at this. And through a very accelerated descriptive timeline here, we cut that dam in half and rebuilt it in about a year to put that back in service to provide all of the benefits I talked about earlier. Supplementing or part of that ongoing operations and maintenance, we have instrumentation on all of our dams to see how they're performing, how water, or changes in water levels or changes in seepage that are expected to come through the dam. Those are monitored by our field staff. That information, since the dams were constructed and placed into service, has been collected, analyzed, and maintained by our engineering folks in Portland. As a matter of fact, that picture right there to the right, I think, is a very young Matt Chase out doing some work in the field many years ago. So, but yeah, very, very active program and things that we're adding to all the time as we learn more or see changes in conditions, increasing our understanding. The support of that really comes through our dam safety training program, and that's for our folks, but also for just general awareness for people that live in and around our dams. And I couldn't tell you, but I know it's been a number of times in the time that I've been here where we've received reports from somebody walking their dog or on top of an earth field saying, hey, there's a hole here. Do you guys know about it? And we will come out and we investigate. Typically and historically, that hasn't been a concern, but even that information is another set of eyes kind of helping us monitor the dams and kind of a nice side benefit of folks being out and familiar with our facilities. And then underlying that are really regular and specific inspection cycles. Annually, periodic, so every 5 years, we do some real specific inspections that I'll talk about. And those inspections help inform much more detailed risk assessments that Matt will discuss later. But all of that information, right, all of that information and all of that knowledge and ongoing maintenance of the system tells us conditions and helps us understand the risks associated with the facilities. And those are the things we know. But there always exists the potential for things we don't know. And that's where emergency action planning and the exercises that we do with our staff at the state level with local county emergency management officials help us think about those what ifs. What if this were to happen, and how would we react? And I think that that's kind of the driver behind what you're trying to do is start to think about those what ifs and how do we best prepare for that. And we do the same thing. Our activities are focused on the operations and maintenance of the structure, whether it's routine or something that were to happen that is outside of the routine. And then that includes how do we inform those folks who would then inform the public on how to best protect yourselves in an emergency. Next slide, Matt. Oh, get the stars out of the way. So really detailed information, and it's a mixture of very, very talented professional engineers that work within our district, working with our project staff on annual and every 5-year cycles. We do routine inspections as part of our normal O&M. Those special inspections that I mentioned earlier, one of the pictures that was on a prior slide had some folks that were roping or rappelling into our spillway gates to do very detailed inspections of those structural members. And that periodic inspection back in 2008 identified some structural deformation in one of our spillway gates. And that awareness led to a broader look at our spillway gates and identification of issues that we had with friction potentially in how the system operated. And we have been rehabilitating those spillway gates since 2008. So we have about 42 spillway gates in the Willamette Valley. We're very near completion of the structural and mechanical and electrical rehabilitation of all of those gates at, in rough terms, about $3 million a gate. So significant investments in that infrastructure that protects folks downstream, all coming up as a result, not of a crisis, not of a failure, but as part of our routine inspection cycle, right? And so again, that is something that I hope awareness of gives you comfort. It is a very robust system, and there's another level to this, and that's what Matt's going to talk about next. Matt, the next slide, really in terms of how we understand risk, because most of what you just saw was pretty routine, but every 10 years we go to another level that helps us better understand if we're trying to get to what is the real risk. You know, this evaluation of hazards. So what's out there and what can happen, whether it is seismic or extreme hydrologic events. In those events, how will our facilities perform? So we start to talk about how we think they would perform and what could go wrong as part of operations and maintenance. And as we narrow in on what those plausible risks are and look at the consequences downstream, it points us in a direction where we can start to go in and further quantify. You know, go and find additional details and pull in additional information to really help understand and narrow down that risk. And that process, through what we call a periodic assessment, is where we are with a number of our dams in the Willamette Valley right now. And Matt Chase, who is our Dam Safety Program Manager, is going to talk with you a little bit about how that process works and how we're further refining risk. Matt?
Thank you, Dustin. Can you hear me all right?
Gotcha.
So like Dustin mentioned, just to kind of reiterate, when we talk about risk has a very specific definition to us in the dam safety world. It encompasses the hazards themselves. What are they? Are they floods? Are they earthquakes? Are they types of different operations? It also encompasses how the project is going to perform. How is it going to react to an earthquake? How is it going to perform during a flood? And then and then we also include the consequences. What is downstream that could be inundated? So we consider all these things as part of risk. So when I talk about risk, keep in mind I'm kind of talking about all these things combined when we look at risk assessments and defining, you know, basically what the level of risk we have. So that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind as I kind of talk through this. So we have various levels of risk assessments. So the risk assessments consider the potential hazards to the dam, again, the expected performance of the dam and the consequences. So part of our routine program is that we conduct what we call a periodic assessment. We do this for all of our dams, and we do this every 10 years for our dams. So in addition to the 13 projects in the Willamette Valley, the 2 in the row, we also have another 5 projects along the Columbia River that the Portland District has in our portfolio. So we roughly, on average, do 2 of these a year, these risk assessments. And during these risk assessments, we review the existing information. We'll go back all the way to the beginning of the project. We'll look at the original drawings, the original reports, all the original analyses that were done, all the inspections that have happened in the past, all the kind of issues that we've run into. We'll look at all that existing information. Then we'll also conduct a periodic inspection. Dustin mentioned earlier that we conduct a very detailed periodic inspection every 5 years. So every other inspection, so every 10 years, we'll do that inspection as part of reviewing this existing information. And then we'll go into something called a potential failure modes analysis. And this involves, a really experienced team. So typically it will have geologists, geotechnical engineers, structural engineers, mechanicals, electricals. We'll have people from the project, folks that work at the project, operators, et cetera, people that know that project really well. And we'll get into a room for almost 2 weeks and talk about different types of failure modes that you might encounter. And we kind of look at that, and then we assess all that, looking at it from a risk standpoint. And that's how we kind of assess these projects. So we do that every 10 years. Then the next level of assessment are what we call issue evaluation studies. So these are advanced risk assessments, and they're prioritized on a national basis and include a really detailed evaluation of the potential hazards. The goal of the advanced risk assessment is to determine whether the risks are beyond a tolerable level. So, and if modifications of and long-term risk reduction measures are required. So this is IES, or an issue evaluation study, will determine if our risks are tolerable, the project will go back to the routine cycle. But if we find that the risks are not tolerable, we'll move on to the next level, which is what we call a dam safety modification study. So these are for moderate to very high risk dams. And these are very in-depth studies. We're going to look at different alternatives to what we might do to improve the performance of that dam, so that we can reduce the risk to below the tolerable level. So these are kind of the 3 levels of risk assessment. So again, the periodic assessment happens every 10 years. It happens to all dams. And then kind of based on how we rank these nationally, they'll go to an IES, and those that we feel need more attention are going to go to a dam safety modification study. And we have done risk assessments on all of our dams at this point now, at least once. So let's talk about hazard potential versus risk calculation. So this is, as we get into the NID, you'll see, and we've had questions about this high hazard dam and what that means. I just kind of want to clarify this because, again, you'll see it in the NID. High hazard potential simply means that high hazard has nothing to do with really risk as I defined it. But a high hazard potential is a dam where failure or misoperation will probably cause loss of human life. So the hazard potential really has nothing to do with the loading condition or the condition of the dam. It really just says that, hey, there's population downstream that could be affected by the failure of this dam. Significant hazard projects are dams where failure or misoperation results in no probable loss of life, but it could cause economic loss or environmental damage. Excuse me. And then low hazard potential would be that there's no loss of life or no low property damage. So those are the 3 types of hazard potential. And again, they're based on downstream consequences. So keeping that in mind, we also have a risk classification. In the NID, there will be a risk classification attached to all the projects. And the risk classification comes out of these studies that what I described, the periodic assessment, the IES, the dam safety modification study. And we rank our projects from very high risk down to very low risk. And again, this is based on those 3 components, which are the event, how the dam performs, and also the downstream consequences. Actions to reduce risks. So if we feel that risks are not tolerable, we will we'll install something called an interim risk reduction measure. So again, if the Corps identifies any risks which are considered not tolerable, then we will implement this IRRM, or ERM, we'll call them. And these ERMs are implemented that will temporarily lower the risk until a more permanent risk reduction measure is implemented. So, for example, we currently have some IRMs implemented at our Willamette Valley project. So Detroit, Cougar, Hills Creek, and Lookout Point. And typically these IRMs are really to address some further studies we're doing, seismic studies of these projects, or also, for example, Cougar, we have an ERM in place while we rehabilitate the second gate there. So we operate that project a little bit differently until we've rehabilitated one gate and we're in the process of rehabilitating another. So until we do that, that one has a different type of operating procedure. So, so these projects are also in the queue to have an issues evaluation study, or will begin soon. So Again, we do have, if we do identify projects that are what we consider not tolerable, we do have actions that we can use to kind of reduce that risk until we do some kind of permanent repair. So moving on into the inundation maps, so kind of moving in now into the NID discussion here, or the National Inventory of Dams discussion. So let's talk about inundation mappings. So why do we have these maps? Well, the Corps uses them in our emergency action plan. So all of our projects have an emergency action plan, and these describe the actions we're going to take if we run into an emergency. We also use these maps for risk assessments. So as I discussed earlier, part of the risk is we quantify the risk based on downstream consequences. That's part of the equation. So these maps help us to assess what kind of inundation we could expect during certain types of dam failures. And also these inundation maps help the local emergency management agencies to develop evacuation and response plans. So a couple of really key things I want to bring up before we get into the mapping. These are based on extremely unlikely and severe dam failure scenarios. And these are, I'll highlight extremely unlikely and severe dam safety failure scenarios. Dams have historically performed very well. Our dams were well designed, well constructed, and they're well maintained. And we have a robust dam safety program. So we consider these failures extremely unlikely. And they also capture extremely large flood events. So the maximum height pool flood inundation, for example, assumes a very, very large series of storms, which is very unlikely to occur, but there is always the probability that it could occur. And these maps also describe rapid and widespread failure. So a very quick failure is how these maps are kind of put together. What these maps are not, however, they are not the 100-year or FEMA flood insurance maps. That's not what these are. And these maps also are not in and of themselves an evacuation or response plan. So again, that is the responsibility of the local emergency management organization to develop those response plans. But these are, again, used to help develop those plans. And these maps are not really specific to the cause of the dam failure. So it maps basically a failure, but it doesn't specify if it's an earthquake or a flood. Well, not an earthquake or some kind of misoperation. So that's what these maps are not. And they're kind of, these are kind of the latest and greatest with using the latest technology and analytical tools we have, but they are not perfect. There are some assumptions that go into the making of these inundation maps. So a little bit about where we were and where we are now. Where we started, years ago, were static map books, printed books. And these were considered for official use only. There was some protected information in there, I guess you could say, that, if these fell into the wrong hands, we wouldn't want that. So we made those available to the local emergency managers, and they still have these printed maps. And some of you may recall, so they weren't generally available to the public for viewing, though we did have some public viewings back in 2014, 2015 timeframe. Generally, to view these, you would have to go make an appointment with the local emergency manager and look at them there. So, they really weren't that available to the public. But now, rewind to today, we are now in the National Inventory of Dams days. So the Corps of Congress has authorized the Corps of Engineers to develop and maintain this website, or basically a database, which is the National Inventory of Dams. And on this database, you have publicly viewable maps, and you can look at different inundation scenarios, and those are out there for everybody to use. And there's a lot of other information in the NID. So I'll kind of walk into it in a second, but basically the NID is a congressionally authorized database that documents more than 91,000 dams across the US and its territories. Again, it's maintained by the US Army Corps of Engineers, and there's lots of data fields for each of these dams, including the dam's location, size, et cetera, and probably most importantly, the inundation maps. So I'm going to move on into, before I move to this slide, I'm going to go ahead and share my inundation map. We're going to do a kind of a flying tour of the NID. So can everyone see my screen here?
Yes, we can see that. And Matt, if you would, could you define what inundation means for us as we're throwing that word around?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely. Inundation is the extent of the areas that will be covered with water. So being thus inundated by a release, a dam failure or a release. So that's what I mean when I say inundation. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to clarify that. So this is the public facing website for the National Inventory of Dams. As I mentioned, there are more than 90,000 dams nationwide, of which the Army Corps of Engineers owns and operates around 700, more than 700. So some statistics here. So again, over 91,000. Average age 60 years. And we talked about the hazard potential. So 76% of those are high hazard dams. Again, could inundate, people downstream. 6% are federally regulated dams. So, and then 70% are state regulated dams. So this website has got a lot of great information in it, and it's kind of beyond the scope of our meeting here to go through everything. However, I'll just kind of do a flying tour of some of the things that are kind of neat in here. So, and so just feel free to play around when you get a chance, but there's an area to learn more about dams. There's a Dams 101 section that talks about all the parts of the dams, how they're built, how they operate, etc. So that's kind of a nice area to go explore. And then also, what is the National Inventory of Dams? Kind of a brief history, some other information here, goes over some of the things I talked about, how it's used, etc. So spend some time exploring that. We've got a photo gallery that is in the works. So we have our own Applegate Dam is in this gallery. So that's kind of an evolving thing. And, I guess I'll mention this website is evolving as well. So it will be changing. More stuff will be added over time. And then there's videos in here. So they're not showing up on my screen for some reason, but there's some good videos here. As a matter of fact, Dustin is starring in the flood inundation map videos. Did you know that, Dustin? You're in this video. So this video was taken during one of our public meetings. So that's something interesting to go look at. So that's kind of exploring that, but let's get back to the home screen, and probably what you're probably interested in is looking at particular dams and inundation mapping. So there's different ways to navigate this NID, and I'll kind of walk through this. So let's just look at Oregon in particular, and we'll go look at Lane County in particular here. And so as this populates, you should be able to see some different dam projects. But see if I can scroll it a little better. Sometimes it's working better than others, but here we go. You can scroll around and pick dams, or you can actually go into if you know the name of the dam you're looking for, you can go into here and search for it. But let's kind of move in and look at Lookout Point. See if we can get it going here. All right. I'm going to do it the other way here. So I'm going to go ahead and go into what I call advanced search and just bring out Lookout Point. So this is Lookout Point Dam here, just upstream of Eugene. And as you can see, there's a summary, kind of gives a general description of the dam, when it was last inspected, talks about its emergency action plan. There's a description here as well. And I'll just kind of scroll through here really fast. Really talks about the dam itself, how it's operated, a lot of other data having to do with the dam. And again, this is publicly accessible. The structure, a little more description here. Particulars about the dam, what it's made of, how tall it is, etc., that kind of thing. And then the risk category. So this is going back to risk and the risk assessments we've conducted. This risk summary comes out of the risk assessment. So when we do our risk assessment, these are kind of the upfront findings from our risk assessment. So that all that is available to look at. And it talks about the last time it was assessed, which was in 2019. There's a tab for inspections. So this is inspected every 5 years, like we talked about earlier, our PIs every 5 years. There's the hazard potential, again, high, again, because there are potential for downstream consequences. And then in the response and preparedness, there's an area that talks about when we've done our last drill or last exercise or that kind of thing. But probably what we're really wanting to look at is the inundation mapping. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. So kind of moving this over so we have some room. There's some layer controls here, and there are different maps you can look at. And then there are different inundation layers that we can look at. So a little description, there's all these different inundation layers. So let me talk about them just a little bit. There's different types of inundation that we use for our risk assessments, but but these represent different types of events. So this MH is what we call a maximum height pool breach, and this assumes, I talked about earlier, the probable maximum flood. This is the largest series of events we could statistically imagine, I guess, and this would be the inundation we could see from a maximum height pool breach. But I also want to point out that there's also a non-breach scenario. So if the dam performs the way it's supposed to, there could be downstream inundation. And so by clicking on this, you can see what that inundation looks like. And you can scroll out, scroll in, and on the legend side, this talks about this is the inundation depths that you could see as a result of this scenario. So even when the dam is operating the way it's supposed to, and without a breach, you still see that there's some inundation. And the one I like to look at, so this is a max high breach. So again, if the dam breached, that would show you what that inundation could look like, compared to, if it didn't breach. But the one I kind of like to look at a lot, and the one, especially when we start thinking about earthquakes and that kind of thing, the NH, which is the normal high pool. And I consider this, I like to call this the sunny day failure mode. So this is during summer when you've got the reservoir at conservation level. So, and if we had a breach, you can click on that and it'll show what that estimated inundation will look like. So in the NID, it describes what these various scenarios mean. And, we can go into that later if we like, but it is in the NID, it does discuss what all those different layers are. So this is kind of a fast way to look at these, but I like to actually look at it using the advanced map viewer. There's a few more features in there that are a little more customizable. So I'm going to go ahead and click the advanced map viewer, and let me know when that shows up there.
Yep, we can see that now.
All right, great. So what are we looking at? We see Lookout Point, Dexter, Fall Creek, Hills Creek upstream, Darena, Cottage Grove, and if we zoom out, we can see even more dams. So I'll say also that the Portland District, all of our dams are loaded into the NID now. So we're up to date on that, and our stuff is up to date. So kind of similarly to what I showed before, we want to look at Lookout Point. We can look at these breaches. So this is the normal high breach. Again, this would be like a sunny day breach, and we'll let it populate here. This gives you a little bit of more customizable here. So that would be the inundation boundaries for this. You can go into the raster class and you can see the different depths of inundation. So this is how much inundation you have over that particular elevation, wherever that's located. So, you can zoom into the greater downtown Eugene and look at how deep that water would be in that case. There's also a traffic raster here. So this describes, how well vehicles could move around in that type of inundation. And you can also customize this. So if you want to look at different types of inundation. So if you wanted to say, look at a value greater than 15 feet, if you wanted to say, well, is there any area that's greater than 30 feet, say? And if I wanted to give it another color, say I could do that. Go ahead and say that. And you can, so it's a bit customizable. So you can see other types of, other information. It also allows you to, you can take measurements. So you can measure distances and areas and that kind of thing. I won't go too deeply into that. You can bookmark this. There are different layers you can use. You can look at like where your airports are, that'll show up on here. Did earlier at least. Colleges. So there's different types of features that you can load into this thing those. This is really helpful for people who are emergency managers to know there's critical, so the different types of infrastructure, those will show up on this map. So there's a lot of really neat features with this. And again, different maps, backgrounds, you can topo maps, etc. So one thing I wanted to caution you about, though, and there was a question that came up earlier during one of our discussions, and I kind of learned about this just lately. So let me talk to it a little bit. Let's see. It's possible to. So I've got lookout point. These are this is the inundation for lookout point, and so you can. The NID allows you to actually show multiple dams at once. And this is something I think we need to kind of go back and look at. So this is a question that came up, so I wanted to kind of address this so there's no confusion about this. This is the normal high breach for lookout point, as we kind of talked about. I'm gonna go back and reset my raster here because I don't care for that. I use that setting as just an example, but I don't really like it normally. So we'll bring this back here. Here, let it repopulate there. Okay, so it is possible to actually show two dams breaching at the same time on this tool. This is not how this is modeled, however. So, and the reason I bring this up, it was in the talk in the discussion we had earlier. So, though it allows you to show these two dams, this really doesn't accurately show what that inundation would look like with both of those dams at the same time. They're not really modeled this way. What you could do is use this as a comparison. So if you wanted to know what the inundation for Fall Creek looked like in comparison to say Fall Creek, you could do that. But really, it is not intended to be combined like this. So just kind of a caveat. So it does allow you to show that, but is not technically, I guess, accurate as far as the inundation boundary and depths. These two projects have not been modeled with the simultaneous failure. So just a caveat for that. However, looking at some of the other maps upstream, say Hills Creek, close that out. The Hills Creek, and I just mentioned this because it was asked earlier. It was one of the read ahead questions we got. So Hills Creek, the Hills Creek Dam inundation does include. So when we have dams in series, the inundation from Hills Creek does include these other two downstream dams. So it would be improper to combine them, on this tool. I hope that kind of helps a little bit. But anyway, that is kind of a flying, I guess, tour of the National Inventory of Dams website. There's a lot of good information on this. However, we know that, having this publicly available is going to prompt questions from people in the public as to how to operate it, what it all means, and we're here to help, I guess, facilitate that discussion. We're happy to have meetings and talk about it and try to get folks we want folks to use this tool. We want them to be aware of the risks living downstream of a dam, what those pose. We want them to be aware of that, and also is I guess a way to encourage dialogue between the public and also their local emergency management agencies to how you would plan for an event like this. So that's really what I have to talk about on the NID. I will, I guess, at this point, open the floor to questions and to questions to everybody on the team here. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope that was helpful to you.
Thank you, Matt. And if anybody does have questions, you can either post them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll invite you to unmute and ask your question. I see some clap reactions. People are excited about this presentation. We'll start with Claire. Invite you to unmute.
Thank you for such a great overview. I'm curious if you could speak to anticipating the effects of climate change, particularly drought, and the impact of that on electricity and or all different impacts that might have.
Dustin, can you take that, or you want me to take a shot at it?
That's a big question, Claire. I will say this, you know, one of the things that we're constantly doing is evaluating, you know, the condition of our structures and the effects of change around us. So wildfire, as an example, has dramatically changed our landscape, right? And has changed how water comes off in the system. And so we're evaluating our operations as the result of that. I don't know that there's a great predictive model out there that says, you know, what drought will look like for us. You know, things that I have read seem to indicate more extreme events, you know, as kind of a general predictor. So, you know, drier dries and more severe, more intense storms. And we've seen a couple of those type events play out in late spring in the last couple of years. So, well, you know, we're constantly evaluating the operation of our system. And in general, the more water we can store in the spring, and it's going to become increasingly that way, that we store in the late spring, the greater the range of opportunities we have during conservation season for downstream flow augmentation, for water supply, for recreation, et cetera. And we have told this story, I've told this story as long as I've been here, you know, really what we store in the system is a function of late spring rains, right? What we get in that April, May, and June timeframe really make the difference between a dry year and an abundant year. And so, you know, as that changes, and there are going to be changing demands on the system, both in terms of what we expect from it and what we can store, as we try to operate our facilities in ways that are more beneficial for fish passage or less impactful in other ways, we're going to have to continue to pay attention to, you know, that change in how kind of how things come to us. But right now, there's not a great predictive model that I know of that says, okay, here's exactly how we would change our operations in terms of hydropower production or you know, storage based on climate.
All right, up next I see Julie.
Good evening. Again, thank you so much for the presentation. I would like to encourage that perhaps we have some follow-up presentations. There was a lot of very deep material presented this evening. Thank you. I actually have two questions. The first one is, are any of the Lane County dams scheduled or being reviewed for removal to help with salmon spawning and salmon runs to restore historic runs? And then my second question, is there any work being done as in the Netherlands that is currently being done to relocate people out of the floodplain and inundation sites? Thank you.
So Julie, can you still hear me? Hopefully folks can still hear me.
Yes, we can.
I can hear you.
Okay, I just lost the video portion, so as long as you can still hear me. I appreciate the question, Julie. One thing that I would draw folks' attention to is that later this month, I think around the 30th, the Corps will be releasing the draft set of recommendations for the update of our programmatic environmental impact statement. And that looks at a range of alternatives of how we will operate our facilities in the future to try to diminish the impact and provide the greatest range of benefits. And so in looking at that, you will see the range of alternatives that are being considered, not only to improve conditions for fish and water quality downstream, but also meet those other benefits, those other authorizations that I mentioned before. Dam removal is not one of the alternatives that is being considered. We needed to consider modifications to our operations that were within our existing authorizations. What that would, you know, removal would be a very different process. But I would really strongly encourage folks to pay attention and be engaged. There will be some sessions in early December that provide an overview of where we are in that new EIS. And that's a great time to become informed on what some of those changes might look like and what those trade-offs are in terms of benefits. And as to the second half of your question, I don't have an answer to that one. That would not be something that we were specifically involved with as far as relocating folks out of the floodway.
All right, thank you. I see Jan up next.
All right. Thanks, Matt and Dustin. I know a lot of people have been wondering about this information for a long time, so it's good to see, should I say, more forthcoming sharing information, and it's great to see everybody here with this kind of an interest. Well, we live downstream, don't we? Well, my question is, have there been any Pineapple Express events in recent years when there's a low snowfall and then a big warm rain event? Have there been any times in recent years where the people at the Corps of Engineer kind of were saying, this looks serious? Any types of worries that there could be an overflow just because of upstream flooding?
That's a great question. So I know you've lived in the Valley for a long time, or in the Northwest for a long time. When you say Pineapple Express, the new term that we're using is atmospheric river, right? Classifications, of severity and how much moisture it's bringing in. But the short answer to your question is yes. We've had some really interesting recent events. If you were here in 2019, you remember how impactful that snowstorm was. And then, on top of that historic snowfall that really challenged everyone in terms of access to facilities. In April of that year, we had an very unusual late rain event that kind of came in and parked itself in the southern end of the Willamette Valley. And you saw that prediction for rainfall in like the Row River Basin near Dorena and a few other places go from 3 inches to 6 inches to, more than that in terms of actual. So you had rain on snow in low elevations. That's typically what had meant historic flooding potential in the Willamette Valley. And I've been here since '93. That's the first time that I had seen all of our reservoirs at or around 100%, just right at the top of our flood storage capacity. And we had some pretty unusual releases. To my knowledge, we didn't have any impacts on structures. So we were right there on that very thin margin. And that period from, say, April to June, remember this last summer, we had such a wet May and June, which really helped us in some areas provide conservation storage, but it's not typical for us to see really heavy rainfall in those late events. So as we're gradually refilling the pool, and we try to get those pools as full as we can by Labor Memorial Day each year in mid-May, we're also at a very risky time, right? So we're higher we've got less flood storage. So any of that late season rain that comes in can be a blessing, can also be a real challenge for us. So we have had some of those recent events that are kind of educational flows for everybody, and you saw higher flows downstream in a number of areas than you have in the past. So it has happened recently, and it was an opportunity. We were very fortunate, and I think we had strong success with how we operated and maintained the facilities, but really unusual weather conditions for us here in the Valley.
All right, next up I see Charlesy.
Yes, hi. So the two risks I saw referred to most often in the NID for the potential of damaging the dams were if there was an unusually wet season and the ground gave way. And another set of risks would be a very strong earthquake. And we know we have the risk of the Cascadia subduction potential. So in the River Road neighborhood, we are kind of landlocked in a way. If we had a very severe earthquake, the potential exists that the bridges and overpasses around us could fall. And we worry a lot, I worry a lot about evacuation potential and so on. So part of what is intriguing about a dam breach is that we would have a period of time between the breach and when the inundation would be at its maximum height.
And now we don't know the circumstances, of course, of what that breach would be, but if we use the maps, the inundation maps, and say, perhaps someday that could happen, even though it may seem unlikely, it could happen. How do we deal with that potential? Do you have anything to say about how much time we might, a ballpark as to when that breach occurs? Say it's Lookout, say it's Hill Creek, and that water reaching us in huge amounts, so that we would have notice, presumably, to do something if we could.
Yeah, Matt, you want to take a stab at that one? I know you did a little bit of looking within the NID and what those travel times were.
I did. Thanks, Dustin. Thank you for the question. So the NID does not have the timing information. That is not part of the NID. I don't know if that's a future addition or what, but at this point, the NID does not have that timing. The print maps, the ones that we distribute to the locals, the counties, cities, et cetera, those do have some timing information. So the print maps do have some timing information. I guess I have to couch this a bit. I have to be careful with this because I have to kind of go back and kind of repeat, there's a lot of assumptions that go into these maps, and they are not really specific to the type of failure. So, and they are also large events that are unlikely. But I took a look for Lookout Point. So for the normal high pool, which is kind of the one I like to use as an example, because that's the, we're all, that's kind of, the pool is at that elevation for part of the summer at least. So it would be roughly, and I'm going to say very roughly, so between 6 and 8 hours to arrive to downtown Eugene proper. And I guess to know more, to get more deeper into that, you would have to arrange a visit, I guess, with the Lane County or one of or the city of Eugene, who has those printed map products. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
All right, before I move on to the other hands, I do want to read out some of the questions that are coming through in the chat. We've been getting answers from the presenters in the chat, so in case anybody can't see those. We've had a question of, do any of the dams have any humans on site? And if so, how often? The answer to that was that the dams do have people on site on a regular basis. There are operators, mechanics, electricians, engineers, park rangers, and natural resource specialists. And all of the folks are trained in dam safety to provide both routine surveillance or maintenance and support during non-routine events like flood or earthquake inspections. One of the other questions that we have gotten out here was a question about the Hills Creek Dam. It was one of the last ones to be added to the inundation map. So there was a question about why that delay was there. There may not have been a specific reason, and the team that has offered to follow up for a better answer there, some of our presenters. The NID was in development all of last year, so those content creators could have been loading all of the maps across the country. And as our presenters mentioned, there are 700 plus dams throughout the country, so that dam specifically might have just been lower on the list to be added to the map. And while I catch up on the other questions, I'll go ahead and call on Ed. I see your hand up next.
Hey, Ed, I think you might be muted there.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. One is, when the measures of inundation are 2 to 6 feet and 6 to 15 feet and above 15 feet, what does above 15 feet indicate?
Well, that is, I'll go ahead and take that. That's just the, in that NID tool, there are only so many, I think they have like 4 different depth options. But as I just showed, and if you go back into that, it is customizable. So you can look at, those were just kind of the default depths that were chosen by the makers of the NID. So in that customizable menu, you can actually go in and look at different inundation depths. Kind of in my display, I took it up to 40. So anything above 40 was showing up in kind of a red color. So that is customizable. So you could actually go in there and look at different inundation depths if you so wanted to. So that was in the advanced map viewer where you have all those other features.
Okay. And then the other one is, how likely is it for if an upstream dam fails, that there's a domino effect and it causes a downstream dam to fail?
Well, the likelihood of that would be based on a risk assessment, I guess. So, but just for at least for the case of the example I showed for Hills Creek, and I saw the question came up in the chat. For the Hills Creek inundation, that inundation assumes that if Hills Creek had a failure, that the two subsequent dams, that being Lookout Point and Dexter, those two would also overtop and fail. So that inundation downstream assumes the failure of those two subsequent dams. I can't speak to if that's how they're all modeled, but I know that in that particular scenario, that was how it was modeled.
Okay, thank you.
John Belcher, I see you next.
Thank you. This echoes the question in the chat as well, and that is, we all know that someday in the future, we're going to have a significant earthquake in our neighborhood. And my question, therefore, is, has there been any modeling done about how well the dams would survive such a earthquake, magnitude 8 or 9 on the coast, and including what might happen if there was a landslide during a full pool event and how that might cause water to slosh over the dam and compromise the dam? Thank you.
Natalie, do you want to take a crack at the seismic question?
Sure, I can take that, and thanks for bringing that up. That was actually, I'm trying to catch up on some of these chat questions. Lots of good questions, so thank you. There's kind of two answers to your question about the seismic studies. So there's kind of two things that we consider. There's number one, is that hazard itself and the loading. So given a certain earthquake occurs, how much shaking do we get at the dams? And we do have recent studies that have been conducted by seismic experts, so seismologists or people who study earthquakes. Those were conducted in 2017, 2020. And these studies have given us an idea of how much shaking could occur at our project for different earthquake scenarios. So considering all of the potential faults in the region, including Cascadia subduction zone, and maybe how extreme that event could be. So for a given fault, you could have lots of different earthquakes that occur on that fault. So that could depend on where it ruptures and how big that rupture is. And so we use that information directly in those risk assessments that Matt was talking about, where we consider all of those different loading scenarios from most likely, so that most likely Cascadia that we all talk about and think about a lot, to really extreme events that are very unlikely to happen, but could have very devastating effects. And then the second part to that is, well, what do we do with that information? So those loadings are what we put directly into our stability analyses that look at, what would happen to our concrete structures, our earthen dams when we subject them to that shaking. And so we do evaluate this every 10 years with our periodic assessment risk assessments that Matt mentioned. And then we also have advanced studies that are ongoing through the, we have a risk management center that's kind of headquartered in Denver, Colorado. And they're spearheading a lot of these more advanced studies that look at what could happen to our projects under these really extreme loadings. And so it's kind of a long-winded answer, but the short answer is we expect the dams, based on the analyses we've done so far, to expect to perform well in these likely earthquake scenarios. Where we have less certainty is what happens in these really extreme and likely cases. And that's where we have these advanced analyses are looking into what specifically could happen. So did that answer some of your question, or do you have a follow-up for that?
Well, you've told me what the studies were, but you haven't told me what they've told you. Are you saying that your expectation is during a Cascadia event, the dams will not fail?
So yeah, so in our most likely Cascadia scenario, we expect the dams to perform well. We would expect to see some damage, but we wouldn't expect a catastrophic breach at our dams in that most likely Cascadia earthquake. So what kind of things would you see? We could see cracking in the concrete structures. We could see some earthen structures themselves, some cracking in those earthen dams. So we would expect to see some damage based on what we're seeing so far, as we don't expect a catastrophic failure for the most likely Cascadia earthquake.
And that analysis includes the potential of a landslide throwing into, say, Hills Creek at high water level.
Yeah, so that's Matt mentioned these periodic assessment, these risk assessments, and kind of what those involve is, we sit around in a room for 2 weeks and brainstorm everything that could possibly go wrong for these range of earthquake scenarios and range of flood scenarios. And a landslide depositing into the reservoirs is something that comes up and that we consider for all of the projects in these risk assessments. And what we found is that just based on the landslide hazard around the reservoirs and just the amount of material that could go in there, is we wouldn't expect a catastrophic failure or a breach to occur from that. We could have some sloshing over the dam, but ultimately what we find is that it wouldn't result in a failure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I see Charles, you up next?
Yes. Let's say that a very unlikely breach occurs in the middle of the night, 2:30, 4 o'clock. How is that breach discovered? And how long is it that an alert is sent out? By whom? And what will we as residents experience as a result of our alert system?
So Charlie, I can tell you a little bit about what might tell us that there's a problem, say in the middle of the night, and then maybe encourage you for a follow-on conversation with, I didn't see in the list if we had anybody from a local emergency management agency to talk about how notifications happen. But if we discover any kind of an issue with our facilities, whether it's an abnormal release of water or conditions that indicate a potential failure or imminent failure of our dams, we would make immediate notification to Lane County, and Lane County would begin to exercise their notification and evacuation plan depending on that event. At the risk of not being able to describe it accurately, I would say I just strongly encourage you to work with the City of Eugene Emergency Manager, Carrie Carl, and Lane County to talk with you about how you get signed up for their alert notifications and what their process is for notifying people that are in harm's way potentially. We have a lot of different things that monitor pool elevations that would indicate an issue for us, and then we have our routine inspections going on. But anything that would indicate something that was outside of the norm, even if it was very preliminary, we would begin that process of communication with the county emergency managers so that they could begin to prepare for that what if, right? What if the situation worsens? What if we need to start to move people? And that function is really a function of local emergency management.
Can you be a little more specific about how much time passes in your estimation between a breach and you contacting the county offices?
Well, to make sure that I understand your question correctly, as soon as we would become aware of any issue, we would make immediate notification to the county. So that's what I could specifically tell you. It's very hard to hypothesize around a condition, that we, may not have identified yet worsening. But as soon as we would identify something, we would make that immediate notification. And then the county has a means of identifying people within a given area and making notifications multiple ways that include, telephone notifications and call outs, as well as door-to-door notifications for folks that are in an area of potential impact. So I think I know what you're saying, but it's really hard to hypothesize around, okay, well, would it take minutes or hours for us to identify something? We have a lot of instrumentation in place that would tell us if there's a change in pool elevations or something that was happening downstream. In an earthquake scenario, it immediately triggers. So even that small earthquake that we had recently triggered inspection requirements for us at all of the dams within the Willamette Valley. And we were able to get folks out on the structures within hours to do inspections on all of those facilities. So it's a little bit of a difficult question to answer, but our notification systems with Lane County have been tested in a number of events, flood events recently, fire events. We have that communication path really well dialed in with the county.
Well, that's good to hear. And we will be following up with them, of course. And the reason I'm asking is that window, that estimated window of 6 to 8 hours is what we would be working against.
Mhm.
That's the sense of urgency here. Thank you.
Mhm.
I see Jolene up next.
Hi, thank you so much for all this great information. So following on Charles's question, you can see where our anxieties drift to in terms of what we're most worried about. And you know, I'm relieved to hear that the current assessment is that the dams will hold if there's a major seismic event. I know there's always potential for the unknown, but and I noticed in the chat this article was referenced that there is a strong likelihood of a megastorm event in California at some point in the near future based on climate change models. And I read that article and I thought, well, I think there's a likelihood of a megastorm event in the Pacific Northwest based on our recent experiences. And so I understand your instrumentation would tell you if, you know, the flow was going over the top basically in that kind of situation. Is there any system in place for letting us know when we're like at 75% and there's heavy rain predicted overnight? I don't know, like, is there some way? Yeah, like, you know, so we're not worried if we're having really heavy rain on top of snow and we don't really know how full the reservoirs are. And I'm just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are two, and unfortunately I have lost my my video, so I can't put the links in the chat. But one area that I would steer everyone to is the Willamette teacup diagram. And what the Willamette teacup diagram will show you is where we are in pool elevation at any given point, right? How much storage we have left. It will show you inflow and outflow. When you hover over the little orange hash marks that look like dams, it'll also tell you where boat ramp elevations are and things you can use in non-emergency events. So it's a great quick reference to where we are sitting in terms of system storage. And if you think about, you know, the kind of what if scenario, knowing where we are in pool elevations at any time of the year, you know, can help you at least understand the potential risk. That normal high scenario, the sunny day scenario that Matt mentioned, we get there typically in the early spring, but we don't stay there very long. And increasingly, it's rare that we get there at all of our pools. So it's pretty unusual for us to be like we were this year at full pool all at the same time for an extended period because we had some extended rains into June. More likely, you'll see us further down in our conservation storage, but it is a great tool to kind of understand the overall risk and what we're releasing out of the dams. The other site that I really think folks will get a lot out of is the Northwest River Forecast Center site. So it will tell you, and there's a bunch of information that you can have just by thumbing around through that site on what the forecast is, what the overall reservoirs look like, if any areas are going to go up to action stage or above bank full stage or to flood stage. And you can see not just the local, but the regional kind of picture of what's happening. And those are really good tools to be informed on what's going on around you so that you can be thinking forward into those, you know, lower consequence, but maybe higher likelihood events, so the periodic flooding type events. And if you get into and you find out how to get logged into those notification systems that the county and the cities have, those will be the same systems that benefit you, whether it is a minor flood event, a major flood event, or some type of, very low likelihood but highly impactful seismic event.
Great, thank you.
I did have one question, a direct question in the chat come through. They mentioned periodic assessments being done every 10 years. Are all of the dams, are they on a staggered schedule, or are multiple dams assessed at the same time?
I'll go ahead and take that. This is Matt. So I mentioned earlier that we have in the Portland District portfolio, we have 20 dams. So we have to do one every 10 years. So roughly we do 2 a year on average. So it just wouldn't be possible to do all of them, in all at the same time. So we have, I guess, kind of a schedule that we've developed to do all those risk assessments. So basically they're on a rotating basis, in no particular order, I guess. But these more in-depth risk assessments are kind of those are established based on the perceived risk of the project.
Thank you. And I see John's hand. John Belcher.
Thank you again for allowing me to ask a question. This is based on old information. A long time ago, I had the opportunity to tour Lookout Point Dam, and in the operations room, there was a huge graph on the wall that was the curve. And I was told at that time that at no time would the Corps of Engineers ever veer from that curve. But since then, my understanding is that at least in one case in Utah, following that curve caused a dam to fail. So my question is that curve still sacrosanct, and has it been modified to account for current changes in our climate?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the curve that he's referring to, each one of our dams has an authorized authorization. So how we operate throughout the year to provide the greatest amount of conservation season storage benefits and diminish flood risks to the greatest extent possible. Those curves have not been modified, and you are correct. We do not increase risk to try to accomplish other authorized purposes. You will see us in most cases operating below those curves, and it's only typically where we have very dry situations where we see or can foresee some real struggles to get conservation storage back for some of those other benefits like fish and wildlife and water quality benefits that you'll see us storing water earlier in the season. But there is always some tension around that, right? There's an interest at times from folks to say, well, we want to make sure that that pool is full every summer for recreation purposes. And the answer to that is no, because if we fill sooner, we increase the risk to flooding downstream. So we're going to continue to operate, along this authorization line. And to this point, none of those curves have been modified based on climate. So we are still operating under those same rule curves or those authorization curves that we had when the project was developed. But we have a lot more tools now in terms of prediction for flows and for forecasts than we perhaps did in the past. So that is something that it's a question that gets asked a lot, typically on the side of how can we store more water for those purposes in the basin. And I'm not familiar with the example that you cited in terms of how it ended up causing dam failure. So sorry, I can't speak to that.
Thank you.
I thought I saw one more hand up. Maybe somebody put it down. Charlesy?
I just wanted to ask the Army Corps speakers, are the maintenance of, I should defer to Kate and these other people, but the maintenance of these dams rests on the funding that the Army Corps gets for that, correct? And I'm just hoping it's a secure funding. So I want to see these dams maintained. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if there was a question there, but I would say that, you know, our dams and part of this this periodic assessment work and these issue evaluation studies helps us quantify risk across all of the facilities, all of the structures that the Corps of Engineers administers nationwide, so that funds can be brought to bear on, you know, the facilities that have the highest potential consequences or are in the greatest need. And so part of this overall risk portfolio that we manage helps the Corps of Engineers maintain focus, you know, keep funds focused on the highest priority needs across the system. And I mentioned an example earlier, you know, the spillway gates within the Willamette Valley are a good example of really high critical infrastructure with really high consequences if there was a failure. And, you know, you've seen over the last 10 or more years really aggressive recapitalization of that infrastructure that protects people downstream. So I think that's a good news story that speaks to your question, Charles E.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Kate, I see you up next.
I have a quick question about the revetment part of flood control. So in Santa Clara, I know there are areas where the revetment in recent years has been completely washed away, and that has precipitated loss of acres of farmland here, and particularly across from the confluence of the Mackenzie and Willamette in our neighborhood. There's a neighbor who's had that happen, and she doesn't have any recourse to replace revetment or reclaim property. And how often is revetment along the floodway inspected? And then what is the process for failure of revetment? And then how is that accounted for in the modeling? Because that provides a really different outcome for the people downstream.
That's a great point, and I'm going to give you a partial answer and then a suggestion, because it is a really complex subject that to do justice to is probably a presentation in and of its own. I know Caroline Williams, who's our Dam Safety and Levee Program Manager, I saw her signed in earlier. But what I would say is this, is that, you know, the revetments that were put in along the Willamette River were put in really for the purposes of stabilizing the banks. Most, if not all of them, were not designed to be true levees to provide flood control. A number of those revetments, after they were constructed, were turned over to local entities to operate and maintain. And so the answer to your question of what is being done around those is kind of a question of authority and ownership based on history. And that's what makes it so complicated. But there are, as you mentioned, you know, a lot of those structures are fairly old, and the river is dynamic, and some of those structures have started to peel away from the banks. And so I would suggest that if folks are really interested, that we maybe form up a future conversation to help explain the levee program and really what we do there in terms of inspection and what local entities do in terms of operation and maintenance of some of those structures. And if Caroline's typing furiously in the chat, no, Dustin, you got it all wrong, then I'm sorry.
And I do, before we move to the last question here, I just posted in the chat as well. Our next monthly emergency preparedness team meeting is going to be on December 6th. And we're going to dedicate that whole meeting to unpacking things that we learned here tonight, talking about follow-ups and next steps, looking for volunteers to take things to the next level. So everybody feel free to join us if you're available. And our last question is from Laura.
Great. Thank you so much for this very interesting meeting. I just want to make sure that I understand the Cascadia earthquake statements that were made. I heard that in the most likely Cascadia scenario, the dams will hold. What is that scenario? And am I right that it's not the 9.0, 1 in 500 year event, and that at this point you don't know what the impact would be of that?
Hey, Laura, that's a really good question. And I was actually attempting to type a response and realize that this is a very complicated answer that maybe warrants more than a typed response. So I'm going to try to do a visual with my hands, so I apologize if it's not totally clear. But when we talk about most likely earthquakes in Cascadia, I guess my short answer is that yes, that most likely event we consider is that 9.0 magnitude event. So we have two plates that are colliding with each other, and the Pacific plate that's sinking down under the North American plate. And kind of where that earthquake occurs, so where that break occurs along that fault, impacts how likely and how large that earthquake is. So even though we know we have this fault source at the coast that looks like this, there's a lot of different scenarios that can occur from a rupture on that fault. So we could have something that breaks, very far on the east-west extent, which would be very large, and it would be closer to the dams, and it would generate a much larger event, something very extreme and unlikely. And that's kind of what we're talking about, is that it could just be this really unlikely scenario where you have rupturing all along that east-west extent of the fault itself. Then also consider the north-south component. That fault runs all the way from British Columbia down to California. So when I say extreme, we're talking about something that goes all the way that north-south extent and is a very wide rupture as well. But just to be clear, yeah, when we do talk about that likely scenario that you mentioned, the 1 in 500 year event, that is a 9.0 earthquake, and that is something we consider, and we do expect good performance in the dams in that most likely scenario. So I apologize, I didn't have a good visual prepared for that, but it's a complicated topic. I'm not a seismologist myself. I have to try to interpret, we interpret what these experts give to us, and with my limited tools, that's the best way I can explain it to you. Does that help at all?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
And I guess I'll just add, this is Matt again, there is sort of an analog we can look at as well for, these are, again, rare events, but you might remember back in 2011, there was a magnitude 9 subduction zone earthquake in Japan. So the Tohoku earthquake, and you might recall that resulted in a large tsunami, a lot of loss. But I think that that earthquake affected like around 400 dams or something like that. And of all those dams, only one failed out of that event, which is kind of an older agricultural dam, I believe. So, there is a data point there that is kind of a similar, event to what, we might be able to expect here. So just, and there are some, if you want to do a look on the internet, I think it's a Tohoku event, and you can look that up, and there's some papers written about that there as well. So there is some information out there.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to our November RRCO meeting. I just wanted to invite you to, if you want to get the newsletter or check our website, we will post this on the website, the recording on the website, and the newsletter lists meeting times for this committee that works so hard on this, and future general meetings of the neighborhood association. So Jackie, Charlesy, thank you so much for your hard work. Do you need anything else to sign off?
I think Jackie might have some comments.
My last comment was just, I wanted to thank Matt and Dustin and Natalie and the rest of their team for coming tonight and answering these questions. No doubt we may not have had firm answers on everything, but we will be following up on stuff over the coming weeks and months.
Great. And thanks to our guests once again, and all our attendees. Good night.
Oh,
Thank you.
save the chat.
I'll save the chat.